Today, we're going to take a look at a report from New Frontier Data on the Global Cannabis Report with growth and trends through 2025. I believe they have 10 to 12 different countries that they're reporting on. We're going to cover just one of those, and then we'll put a link to the show notes in case you're interested, but giving a complete global cannabis report coming up.
It's only entertainment.
Welcome back to the Talking Hedge. I'm Josh Kincaid, capital markets analyst and host of your Cannabis Business Podcast. So in the last couple of years since New Frontier Data's last global market outlook, cannabis has undergone a sea of change in liberalization, normalization, and commercialization, with two broad themes fueling that expansion for legal cannabis globally, which is growing acceptance of the plant's therapeutic value, and then a recognition of the industry's potential as a catalyst for economic growth. We saw in December 2020 with the United Nations voting to reschedule cannabis and also asking World Health Organization and UN to remove CBD entirely from the schedule of narcotic drugs. So kind of an important step to acknowledge that the global feel for cannabinoids is becoming more positive and less focused on, gangs and violence. That's a lot of South America's got that that imagery, and so to try to get more therapeutics behind it has taken a while, but definitely driving force behind all of that. So we're seeing some legalization and tailwinds behind that kind of affecting, although New Zealand narrowly failed despite having a strong backing by the country's prime minister. Morocco's latest legislature passed a cannabis bill. Malta just became the first EU country to legalize. We're seeing Afghanistan getting cannabis from Germany. We're going to report on that because I find that really fascinating. So we're seeing it's illegal, right? A lot of parts of the world, but self-reporting usage is rising due to a lot of factors. So pandemic, you saw a lot of people like in parts of France completely shut down alcohol sales. And I think that really heightened the awareness of CBD and other cannabinoids like THC. So as mentioned, with COVID kind of increasing the use of cannabis, at least in the US, reporting cannabis users reporting using more for all kinds of stress, anxiety, the work from home, and then not being able to go out with social gatherings. So increasing the usage, so driving retail sales 35% higher for the year than previously forecasted. North America is still at the epicenter of the global cannabis economy, accounting for 97% of legal sales in 2020, with Canada. Canada beat the US with the fully market rollout, but the 38 US states that have legalized medical or adult use are home to a population that's 6 times the size of Canada. So it doesn't even really compare when it comes down to revenues and how much the US is, and that's why you're seeing a lot of Canadian companies come down here and acquire US companies, is because they're peaked. Their stock prices are already pretty bloated in terms of the speculation. A lot of these companies just aren't really generating the revenue to support that, and I think the hedge for them is to come into the US and start acquiring some companies. So we've seen Europe, kind of their more laissez-faire attitude towards cannabis, with the exception of Netherlands, Portugal decriminalizing all drugs, but they're slowly transitioning to regulation. So Germany announcing that they're going to legalize as well. I would imagine the Netherlands will be right behind them, and then the UK will get FOMO and try to drive in some tourism and revenue. Germany does have a lot of clout, though, so being the largest economy in the EU, when they legalize, they're going to create some policies there, and then people will easily be able to kind of copy that, say, and point to Germany and say, well, they're doing it. So if they elect those pro-cannabis mandates, then that's going to encourage other political candidates in other countries to kind of leverage that policy and propel cannabis into EU legalization. So I've said before, follow the money. So In terms of legalization, it's not going to be about the therapeutic benefits. It's going to be about the revenue potential. And so investors are kind of that bellwether to know whether or not it's going to work out. And like I've mentioned, with kind of an e-commerce standpoint and Uber delivery, when big companies get in and there's no backlash, better believe that other companies are coming in. Pfizer with their $6 billion acquisition. It's just going to keep on happening at stupid values that have been mentioned. That stupid money will be coming in. So first half of 2021 already saw almost 8 billion in cannabis deals. So investors are coming into the space, looking at the US probably primarily, but of course looking all over the place. So every sector saw investments, whether it was production, processing, retail. Average deal since 2017, it's 3 times larger. So 24 million from 7.4 million. So average deal size is also tenfold. Average deal size is 47 million, up from 4.9. And it's crazy too, because you're seeing like edible companies being sold for like 300 million right now. And you have all these, like, think about Dope Magazine, if you know, being bought for I think 13 million. That's not a lot. And they were in a lot of states. This other edibles company that's only in 5 or 6 states got sold for 300 million, when a magazine is in, you know, dozens, 2 dozen states, and they only get sold for a fraction of that. So kind of makes you think about what some people are doing, what they're focusing on and spending time on, because stupid money is only going to be around so long until it comes back down to normal. So this is your opportunity. This is your exit, if you've been doing it for a while. And if not, don't go towards edibles, because that deal is not always going to be there. I kind of think outside the box, but there's $7.6 billion transactions in Ireland for biopharma when Jazz Pharmaceuticals bought GW Pharma. So that was a big kind of, I guess everyone's getting into the industry. And we already knew, right? I mean, it's kind of been obvious what's been happening, but Tilray and Afria mega mergers, that was $7.6 billion, I guess, for between that combined market cap. Canopy Growth, still slightly larger with 8.7 billion market cap, announcing its $435 million acquisition of Supreme Cannabis in Canada, which I'm not sure that valuation is going to hold, but we'll see. Trulieve, acquisition of Harvest Health. They're in 11 states, got 22 cultivation facilities and 126 dispensaries. Cureleaf acquired EMMAC Life Sciences for 286 million in stock and cash. So a lot of stuff. British American Tobacco, $177 million deal for 20% of Canada's Organogram. Altria, right, and Kronos Group in 2019. I mean, writing's on the wall. It's here. It's going to be big cannabis before you know it. 70 countries around the world have legalized some form of cannabis from medical use, with 26 of those providing medical patients with legal access to high THC cannabis. Worldwide, you've got 10 countries that have legalized cannabis for adult use, 6 adopting a system for regulated distribution. Definitely is not going to get that back in the bottle. So people are waking up to the fact that this is going to be a huge industry, with global sales projected to be 51 billion by 2025, 16% CAGR, that's compounding annual growth rate. So looking at the legal markets, high THC cannabis sales totaled 23.7 billion in 2020. Looks like adult use states in the US alone accounting for 20 billion, or 86% of that. Medical sales in the US didn't fare too bad. It was over 20 billion in 2020. It was 10 times the amount of any other legal spending seen in any other legal country. Canada, the world's second country, was the first G7 nation to do so. They saw over 2 billion of high THC cannabis sold. And then the highest rates for social acceptance for cannabis use in countries with legal sales were considerably smaller. Germany, which allows insurance reimbursements for medical cannabis patients, had the largest legal medical program in Europe, estimated at 206 million. So nothing, nothing by comparison. Spain doesn't even have a federally regulated program for cannabis, so it's kind of a autonomous. Cannabis clubs in Spain have kind of popped up. That's probably where you get a lot of the stuff. I know in Canada, you can do the same thing, go into a cannabis cafe and somebody's got something. So it looks like Spain, they're estimated to have around 431 million in 2019, close to the third largest national market behind the US and Canada. So globally, medical cannabis has been kind of the main driver of legalization, but most of the time, once you have regulation or legalization, the medical programs just kind of go to the wayside. In Europe, they've kind of taken a pharmaceutical approach. South America, some of those countries have done similar pharmaceutical approaches. Latin America, trying to get medical staff and doctors to promote that a little bit more. So 4.4 million active medical cannabis patients globally. So a number of patients in the programs is projected to grow by more than 2 million over the next 5 years to 6.5 million worldwide by 2025. And then when ranked by density or saturation, looks like Puerto Rico, highest registered rate of participation with 3.9% of its population enrolled. It's modeled after the more openly accessible programs in the US, where patients can register for a wide variety of reasons. And I'm going to jump into Puerto Rico because it's one of the more interesting markets in the world. Puerto Rico is the only place in the US that, as an American, you can go and not be forced to pay federal taxes. So if you are crypto or anything, really, you can go to Puerto Rico. Difference is if you go anywhere in the world, you have a foreign income tax exclusion up to $140,000. Beyond that, you have to pay the federal government. But if you want to vote with your dollars, or for whatever reason you don't want to pay the federal government, you can go. The only place you can go is Puerto Rico, because they don't have congressional representation. You can't have taxation without representation. So Puerto Rico is the only place you can go as an American and not be forced, not pay federal income tax. So I want to take a look at their program, because for someone in California doing the same thing, when you have federal legalization, you're going to have to make 37% more in California than someone in Puerto Rico doing the same exact thing. Yes, Puerto Rico has transportation issues and higher costs, but at the bottom, at the end of the day, bottom line, Puerto Rico is going to make way more money than anybody else in the United States because of that one aspect. So legal sales are projected to be at least double that of medical by 2025. I would think medical is going to be a lot lower than that. I think it's the on-ramp over the next few years is going to be dramatic, and medical will just fall off to the wayside. But you see 10 countries in the world that have approved cannabis for adult use. Only 6 have adopted systems for regulated distribution of high THC. The Netherlands and Spain have adopted decriminalized club and social use model, and others like South Africa and Jamaica decriminalizing cannabis for adult use, but only through restricted access for certain demographics or religions, like the Rastafarian community, or legalize adult use programs without a framework for distribution or consumers. And that's the way that Amsterdam was for a long time. Like cannabis just came out of nowhere. You weren't allowed to actually get it and distribute it. It just showed up. So a total of 4 legally operating adult use cannabis markets as of 2020. So US and Canada is the dominant, but you got Uruguay, the world's first country to fully legalize. They've only sold 1,700 kilograms of high THC cannabis to clubs, while Netherlands has sold 104 million through its network of retail coffee shops. So the estimate for the global spending is about 415 billion. In 2020, annual spend projected to climb to 496 billion by 2025. And we don't even see like total federal legalization. So 94% of all of the 2020 spending on high THC cannabis was unregulated. Asia at 45% of the world's largest market, followed by North America, and then Europe at 20%. Asia is dominance due to the overall size of the region, home to 60% of the world's population. I get a ton of viewership for the Talking Hedge in India. So shout out to you guys. A lot of people are listening over there. So I'm assuming you guys are anticipating hemp and CBD and cannabis legalization. You're trying to figure out how to do it and what's happening. So appreciate you guys listening. So moving on from total cannabis sales, countries with the highest consumer spend on high THC is China, 123 million. So when I was working with the World Trade Center to develop their online e-commerce platform called the Export Store, specifically for CBD companies here in Washington State, China had reached out to an attorney I know in Oregon looking for their excess cannabis. So I don't know really much about what's going on over there, what they're doing, but I find it fascinating that they're where they're at. And then in India, 21.6 million spending on high THC cannabis. So consumers are out there in places I wouldn't have anticipated, like China and India. So good on you. Estimated value of spending by all consumers in 2020, Asia dominated because, again, so many folks between India and China alone, 45% of the overall market, pretty crazy. Whereas Latin America, practically a third of Africa. That's really surprising. So I guess not so much because of the perceived violence associated with marijuana in places like Mexico and Latin America, Honduras, and other places. Only 1% in the Caribbean. That's really surprising, or not surprising, but interesting. 268 million global estimated number of people who consume cannabis at least once in 2020. If you're looking for a little arbitrage opportunity, you can buy in Africa for $3 and sell in Oceania, that's Australia, New Zealand, for $15 per gram. I think in the US, you can take it from Seattle to New York. That's your best arbitrage opportunity right now. So this is a pretty good report. I'll put a link in the show notes because they've got so many things going on, but maybe this is a good point to take a look at Puerto Rico and kind of give you guys an idea or a glimpse relative to North America at 368 million. Cannabis consumers are almost 50 million, spending on almost 93 billion. Let's take a look at Puerto Rico and what's happening down here. So medical sales in Puerto Rico since 2015. Qualifying conditions, I think, are fairly long. I don't think it's very difficult to get. I think there's a lot of cannabis shops or dispensaries rather down there, and you can get a lot of different products. 3.1 million people on that island, 172,000 consumers spending $229 million with an average price per gram of only $5.50. I hope it's good. 118,000 medical patients. Looks like 277,000 was the legal sales. Is their expectation in 2025 is 277 million. So Puerto Rico, interesting spot, especially if you're an American business person or individual looking to relocate somewhere warm. This is a 120-page report, so I'm just going to cut straight to the key takeaways. Again, leaving the link in the description. You can look at quite a few different countries and their reports and what's happening. And again, New Frontier data goes into all kinds of stuff about consumers' use of flower and non-flower, the share of legal cannabis sales by product category, all of this information. And you can do with what you will, but here's some key takeaways. Consumers are spending about 415 billion annually, which is a huge impact. So that's about $500 billion worldwide. A lot of it is unregulated for now, But again, they're going to want that money. So once they get the go ahead from other countries to not get tariffs or blocks on commodities like tariffs, then they'll have the green light and move forward. So spending is only going to be going up, especially in states. Once you can cross the US and go against different states, you're going to see a lot more beverages. Because if you look at the traditionally, there's just regional beverages, and we just don't have infused coffee anywhere. And I mean, you do in some markets like Portland, but not in Seattle. So we're going to see a lot of transition from the illicit to legal as prices kind of keep coming down. You're seeing $19 ounces in Oregon. We're just doing reports right now on the impacts on pricing coming way down at the wholesale and retail levels. That'll continue to create a consolidation in the market over time. And that'll create big cannabis, unfortunately, and from the ashes will rise some pretty good cultivars and companies, but it's going to be a pretty rough process. I think everybody already knew that. But still, the reality is going to be pretty tough. You got 268 million consumers in the meantime looking for something consistent, and available and good. And they'll probably settle for the equivalent of a Budweiser, whatever. But you need some better friends teach you about terpenes and better cultivars and brands. So consumption, I think we're going to start to see more cafes. The report doesn't really talk about cafes necessarily, but I think that's kind of the heart and window and soul to the community. And so that'll be a big part of where I think people will consume and learn about new brands, techniques, rituals. We'll see some a lot more products and demos and educational groups and yoga, whatever. There's just gonna be a lot of things where it'll be in the public's eye and not so stereotyped. A third of the nations have already passed some form of legalization. Most are fairly restrictive. You have across all legal country markets, sales of high THC cannabis, about 24 billion. Sales are going to be double that, 50 billion by 2025. North America is going to be the global epicenter. California, fifth largest GDP in the world, is going to be the epicenter of that. So if you really want to narrow down where you're at, that's where you want to go. There's an interesting use case study in this report on Oklahoma having 7,500 licenses. I think I've already mentioned on the podcast that I turned down a $30 million budget to go into Oklahoma and work in that market, but I'm not interested in trying to find a diamond in the rough, if you will. It's a lot of licenses, and it's better suited for somebody who's on the ground. So I don't know who the equivalent of the talking hedge is in Oklahoma, but I wasn't interested in digging that guy out of a hole, because I'm pretty sure he's going to lose all of his money trying to figure out who's good in that market, and he doesn't have a clue. But there's back to the report, 4.4 million patients registered in medical cannabis. It's going to reach 7 million by 2025. I think medical is just going to be out the window. Maybe you'll get tax-free, maybe you'll get reimbursed by insurance, but that whole idea of the industry being medical when it's really nothing like that. Like, you're just going to buy and get reimbursed or not. So pain-related conditions are a big segment. Maybe an opportunity for medical, but more than 1/5 of the global population suffers from pain. How are you going to do that when the FDA doesn't allow you to claim anything? So that's why big cannabis might come in and have these patents, and the only ones who can make these claims, I don't know. We'll see. We are seeing global cannabis trades. It's limited, but around the world there are some countries that are kind of trying to get that early mover advantages and trade internationally. Like I mentioned, Afghanistan. So the Taliban initiated trade with Germany, Colombia, Peru. Some of these other companies too are driving that, trying to be low cost suppliers. Colombia. You just think about coffee, you got low cost of labor and perfect favorable climates for cultivation. So all of the investment for global expansion kind of focusing on other commodities, agricultural commodities like coffee in places like Colombia and Peru. We see rapid expansion of production capacity in export-focused markets. The supply chain for import markets is slower than expected, but the emerging global cannabis economy is going to see some opportunities, complex regulations, immature supply chains, nascent consumer markets, and disruptive emerging trends are going to be increasing risks, and those will be ironed out eventually with enough capital. Washington State, we just did a podcast on how bumpy the rollout is from every other, tech rollout. And when you're trying to build something from scratch, inevitably it's going to have its bumpy rollouts. A lot of people wanted to push through the I-502 bill, that's a legalization in Washington State, and then say fix it later. And you just get that whole mentality of do it now, fix it later. And that's kind of what we're dealing with in this industry is a lot of headache, ups and downs, and hurry up and wait. But we'll get there eventually.
With that, we're going to roll this one up. I'm Josh Kincaid. This is The Talking Hedge. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe, or don't, and I'm out.
Don't forget to smash that like button on your way out and check out these other videos that we've got.